Good evening. Hello, wherever you are. Welcome to my Saturday Live. I'm here today, Munwara Ali, leadership coach consultant. And I'm here on Saturdays to throw the spotlight on community leadership once again. And I've had on the last two Saturdays some fantastic guests. Today, I have a very interesting guest. Her name is Dipti Solanki. She's going to be with me in any minute soon. And I just want to, for those who are here, say that the topic today is a very sensitive one, and I appreciate and I want to acknowledge that sometimes it could affect you or trigger you. So just to be mindful that our intention is not to upset anyone or to trigger. However, we do look forward to any comments or feedback you have. Please feel free to ask my guest Dipti questions because she is an expert in her field, and I hope that you enjoy our conversation and you get the most out of what Dipti can share with us today. So without further ado, I'm going to invite my lovely guest in. Hi.
Good evening, Manwara. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Hi, Dipti. Thank you very much, Dipti, for agreeing to be here today. It's I'm really looking forward to our conversation and what might come out.
Absolutely. It's my absolute joy to spend my Saturday evening with you today.
Thank you. Dipti, give us a quick intro of yourself, please. I mean, all I do know quite a bit, but there's so much more we don't know.
Okay, so I'm Dipti. I live in London with my husband and my two boys and our dog. The identity, the work identity is that I am a grief coach, grief specialist, and also very needy, fully trained counsellor. My work is all about breaking down taboos around grief and loss, educating people around grief and loss, supporting people through grief and loss of all different kinds. I think there's a lot of work that we need to do around that. And I think in a nutshell, that's what I do. I work with companies, individuals. I've also founded a CIC, which is a community interest company that provides accessible grief support and, most importantly, culturally competent grief support for people.
That's really interesting. I'm particularly interested in the culturally competent part. Thank you, Dipti. I'm just, I mean, for our viewers, whoever's listening and watching right now, and you can also catch it on replay on my YouTube channel and LinkedIn profile. For the benefit of the viewers, like, how did we meet? Because we've not
Well,
known each other for long, right?
we really haven't, but I feel like I've known you forever now. It happened very quickly. It was an instant meeting of minds and hearts, I think, wasn't it? So we have so we had some funding. We still are, and we're running a project called Grief and Wellbeing in the Community, and that really entails delivering workshops that help people understand the full gamut of the different types of losses that we can experience, how grief affects us, why it's important to deal with grief, how we can take care of our well-being, but also like in a cultural through a cultural lens, why is it important that we understand how grief manifests differently for different parts of society, and the benefit of all us understanding that. So I called you and I said, look, really interested in delivering one of our workshops. Would you be happy to have a chat? And I think we ended up talking for nearly an hour on the phone, didn't we? Yeah. And
I was really fascinated by your project and your organization and the work you were doing because I mean, I've been in youth work for many years and in the charity sector for more than 30 years. And working in that sector, we know the kind of clientele we work with. A lot of that, often means you're working with colleagues that perhaps have had trauma in the past or come from the same kind of background as the service users that we work with, your average youth worker, including myself. becomes a youth worker and wants to help every other young person, because we have had lived experience where we've been victims of XYZ as a
Mm-hmm.
young person. And when once we become a youth worker, it's like, we can't undo what happened to us, but what we can do is help others,
Right.
and hope that they won't go through the same kind of thing. So yeah, I'm really keen and interesting, also to know, because I don't actually know a lot, but it'd be great to know, like, what brought you to this field. What's your story? Everybody
Yeah.
has a story, right?
We all have a story. We all have purpose behind it. Yeah. So mine was very much through lived experience. So when I was 13, I'll share it quickly. When I was 13, I lost my mother very suddenly to medical negligence. And I have this big, beautiful Indian family, and deeply religious. And, they all cosseted you and just encourage you to get on. It's just part of life. So there was an experience of grief, but grieving and what that looks like, what that means, the importance of grieving, I don't think I understood it, because I was enveloped by
Mm,
love and protection. So I just continued. I was always ambitious, so eye on the prize. First girl in the
mm,
family to go to university, had a great job. Wanted to be an MP. So my first job straight out of university was as a parliamentary researcher. I was married by then. And then all of a sudden, in my very early 20s, I had the most magnificent nervous breakdown. Panic attacks, debilitating panic attacks, anxiety, and I didn't understand it, because everything in my life was good. There was nothing that I could point to that was causing this debilitating condition where I just sat in a chair for months. I couldn't get out. And I was offered lots of, medical intervention, but something inside of me was like, I can't accept that, because I just needed to know why. I needed to make sense of this experience I was having. And so that led me on this whole journey. I left my job, and I went to see lots of different therapists and walked out of lots of therapists' consulting rooms, because I wasn't getting the answers that I needed. Like, I needed to know why this had happened to me, because for me, I was strong. Like, it didn't make
mm,
sense. And then someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "My darling girl, this is grief." And my immediate reaction was, "Well, don't be so ridiculous. That was so many years ago." Like, no, it's fine. I was okay. But I thought there's something in this. So I went to work with a grief coach. And what I learned about grief, the different ways in which it can show up, how it affects us emotionally, physically, spiritually. And I just remember having this sense of, why does no one talk about this? Why can I not find this out anywhere really accessible? Like, why? And from there, there was a fire within me that I need to let everyone know about this. We need to talk about this more. And the journey just unfolded from there. So,
mm,
I trained in alternative health, and then as a grief coach, a life coach, now as a counsellor. And I don't shut up about it now. I think it's really important. I think it's important for us to be able to connect, to understand each other, to stay emotionally healthy. So, and then really tragically, most recently during the pandemic, my dad, he died of COVID at the height of COVID. And that was when more learning happened for me, because I needed support, and
mm,
couldn't find the right support for me.
mm,
Um, and that's when I understood. Well, I realized that I was having to explain myself and how we grieve and why it mattered, and on a societal level and on a spiritual level. And that's when I noticed that there's a need for really culturally competent grief support and accessible grief support, because there are whole parts of society that just don't reach out, because for lots of different reasons. So that's where Grief Matters for All was born, in the memory of my beautiful dad. His spirit
mm,
was very much in the vein of service to society, and that is in homage to him. But also for us to do some really good work with different parts of society, so that they feel understood, they feel seen, They don't feel like they have to explain themselves. Um,
Mm.
they can come to a place where they can really start to heal. So yeah, that's the journey in a nutshell so far.
That's a beautiful journey, and thank you for sharing, and thank you for introducing us, I guess, to something that none of us really think of. I mean, as you were speaking, I was thinking, why do we hold? Is there a particular reason why, whether you want to say it's cultural or not, but why at 13 something happens to you and then you don't even react or grieve until like something drastic happens to you in your 20s? Is that like, why do we do that? And is it like a woman thing or is it like a cultural thing? What's the reason in your experience?
I think there are lots of different reasons. I think one of the biggest reasons is just us as a society. Doesn't matter where you're from, what your background is. I think the immediate reaction is
Mm,
survival. And so we want to just carry on. We need to know that we can get through the days. And I think there really is a lack of education and spaces to tell us how important it is actually to grieve. To grieve whatever the loss is such a sacred process. It's a transition, it's a metamorphosis. And I don't think there are enough places where this is spoken about. I think society moves at such a
mm,
pace that we just have to get straight back into life. I think it's considered a
mm,
weakness to grieve, but actually it's such an important process. And then come in the different cultural nuances of how different religions see grief, of how different factors of society see grief. And I think that there's a big kind of melting pot of reasons why we don't grieve effectively. But what in my case, and in a lot of cases of a lot of people I've worked with and I see, thankfully there's this mind body connection where the body kind of goes, well, this she's not getting it. That there's something here that needs to be dealt with. And when we have symptoms, it's our body's really benevolent way of speaking to
mm.
us. Um, and the symptoms that I experienced, the anxiety, all of that, the depression, the panic attacks, that was my body saying, you need to deal with this. Um, and there are lots of different ways in which grief shows up. But yeah.
It's a minefield. It is. I was just thinking about like my own lived experience, trying to relate to this personally. And I think, in my own Asian family setting, if you're the eldest or if you're someone that holds a lot of responsibilities, sometimes everyone's eyes on you. So therefore, you almost cannot grieve or just be normal, because being normal means the impact on others, and you've got to be extra cautious. I mean, I I give that. I mean, I can give my own personal example. When my mother passed away, it affected my siblings, and it affected my father. But just to keep him going, I kept going, because I was his right hand and he needed me
Right.
more than any of us knew. And whereas my sister fell apart, my younger sister, I was still like, keeping things together, telling people what to do, because we have these religious rituals. And like you said earlier,
Right.
even now when somebody dies within our family, I know as the eldest, through my experience, what I need to do, what I can do, is bring people together. So I'll round up all the relatives, maybe the cousins, and say, we read the Quran when someone, from the moment that somebody passes to the moment that they're laid to bury, those 24 hours or whatever time, we read as much of the Quran as possible. And it's impossible for one person, because there's 30 chapters, for one person to
Right.
complete it. And what I have found over the years as I've matured and got older is, if I could be the person to coordinate everyone and give everyone a purpose, then it's a way for them to come together in grief, in moments of sadness as
Right.
part of bereavement. So what we'll do is split up and say, okay, you're going to read 4 chapters, that one was going to read. And people offer and they want to do it, and everyone wants to be a part of it, even if it's like, okay, I've got work, I haven't got enough time, but I'll do half a chapter, because it's
Mm,
the feeling of knowing that we are grieving together.
yes. And another thing that I would add to that is grief renders a lot of people helpless. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. And, you know, the different rituals we have are so important in bringing people together, in giving people a sense of purpose. But I think there's a lot around the language of grief that we can work with as well. I mean, you know, one thing that automatically trips off the tongue for many people is, you know, when they're giving someone solace, is just be
Mm,
strong. Okay. What does being strong mean? Being strong, I've learned over the years, means um, just hold it together. Just hold it together. Please don't show anyone how you really feel, because I'm going to get really uncomfortable and I won't know what to do with you. So just be really strong. Okay. There's a gentle pressure underneath that. And even, you know, you describing your sister, she just fell apart. Or was she just
she
grieving?
was she was
Right?
grieving.
Yeah, it's demonstrably grieving, and these are the things that I really try and work with in saying to people. For some of us, especially depending on your position in the family in terms of age, if we're the elder ones, you don't really have much of a choice, that you have to keep
Mm,
going. But then there are other people that will deal with that differently as well, and it's about not making any of that
mm,
wrong. You know, that the older ones probably go and grieve in
mm,
private and they shed their tears in
mm,
private,
mm,
right? And the younger ones have a different way of doing it, and it's not making any of that
mm,
wrong. Like it's all welcome.
mm. And it's interesting because my daughter studies psychology, and I said to
Right.
her, one time I said to her, I don't know, I feel a bit weird, and she said, in what way? I said, I just feel like achy, like I'm gonna come down with something. And she said, Mum, um, it, your body is feeling something. And she said, it wasn't grief, but she was saying that it's almost like you, whatever you're feeling emotionally is coming through physically. And then
Right.
I looked into, and I was, the whole thing around somatic, and
Yeah.
it's really interesting because I don't know. I mean, I'm not a psychology student. I do, have learned a little bit of business psychology, but like, I just find it really fascinating. And I think, yeah. And
Mhm.
so when you say like, culturally people grieve differently, um,
Right.
so do you deal with different communities in a different way?
So over the years, I never used to really decipher, right, about
Mm,
culture. Underneath it all, there's a shared humanity that we all have, where if we have a broken heart, no matter what the type of loss is, we're going to feel similar emotions. However, then we have this added layer of our family background, because that's first. Each family, no matter what the culture is going to deal with things differently. Some people are comfortable with emotions, some are
mm,
not. Um, then we have the layer of religion, if people are religious in any way, shape, or form. And then we have societal layers, and people that have their differ a big part of grieving. And all of that in a melting pot is going to really affect the way that we grieve. And so, understanding for me all the different beautiful rituals that different cultures and communities have is so important, because what you don't want is, when you're trying to get grief support, is you having to go to your therapist, your coach, whoever it is that you're speaking to, and you have to explain why things happen in a certain way. You want to
mm,
go to a place where you immediately feel seen, you immediately feel heard, and it's not your job to educate your therapist. The therapist, I think, has a responsibility to understand the general nature of these things. Um, and it just makes you feel understood, and you're more likely to open up and be more vulnerable. And that will affect your trajectory, your healing trajectory. And it's so important that people feel safe, psychologically safe, because if you find yourself having to explain that, your family observes 9 nights, or for example, I'm Hindu, so, we have a 12-day ceremony where people are fed and there's prayers done and all of that. If I have to feel that I have to explain that and then justify that to a certain point, you're just going to close down. You're not going to open up. But once you feel seen, you're more likely to just open up about what's in your heart. And I think it's important.
I think that's like the first time I've ever heard anybody say that, and I think that's really powerful. The bit you mentioned about vulnerability, because vulnerability is important in order to be able to provide the right support, right? I've never heard anybody say before, you're the first Dipti to say that, the therapist has a responsibility.
Yeah, we do.
And what I have discovered though, and I have noticed in a lot of the jobs I've been in before, is that people, like, I used to work in Tower Hamlets with some in a refuge, so with victims of domestic violence. And one of the common problems we had was there being a really serious lack of culturally competent counsellors. So quite often, the women would come back and they weren't, like, they were not happy with the therapy. And there was very little understanding around the cultural side of things. So,
Right.
yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that this holds people back from getting really incredible support that they can access, that they can really transform and heal through. And I think things are getting better. I do think things
Mm,
are getting better. I think that they're, especially with my training as well, it's emphasized that it's our responsibility as therapists to make sure that we show up for everyone in a way that is inclusive, that makes them feel heard and seen. But I think people often don't know where to go to find these
mm.
services as well. So I think it's great that we're having this conversation, and thank you for inviting me on, because we can highlight where people can go for these things.
Absolutely. And I think it's extremely relevant. If somebody's just LinkedIn user has messaged, there's no services for grief for ethnic minorities. There's a lack of cultural and religious competency. I mean, that's
And
then you've
that's
got,
why we exist, right? That's why Group Matters for All exists. Yeah.
yeah, and fantastic. I never came across you before, and I was really, that's why I was so excited when we got talking. And I do think that a lot of our communities, I mean, as a coach, I do business coaching, and just generally, like, leadership is my something that I advocate for. So I run leadership development training for and coaching for women. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years is sometimes people have unhealed trauma that needs to be dealt with, and that really upsets me sometimes, especially in the area of coaching, because I've spoken to a few women that have said they've been to this coach and that coach, and it's all life coaching, and it's like, you can't just take money off people for coaching when people actually need counseling. And there's things that they need to heal from before they're ready for,
Right.
you know
Right, and they're obstacles. They're real visceral barriers. And I mentioned to you before, the reason that I'm now studying for my masters as well, because it's crazy, it's ridiculous with the amount of stuff that I do. But it was important because that's what I noticed, is if people come to you, there needs to be a whole journey that you take them through. And so what my training that I'm kind of embarking on right now, nearly finished, is personal consultancy. And personal consultancy is a blend of counseling that moves into coaching. So you can take people on that whole journey. because we've all noticed that when we're working with somebody, if we come, anyone responsible, a responsible coach is going to say, look, there's this trauma that needs to be dealt with, there's this grief, loss, whatever it may be. I suggest you go to a therapist. How likely is it that someone's going to go to the effort of now finding a therapist? How likely is it that they're going to come back to you? So people just leave it because they feel like there's no space for them, or it's too much effort. It takes a lot to build that relationship with somebody. So taking people on that whole journey really holds them in a psychologically safe space.
No, that sounds wonderful. I mean, I've been in situations where I've had to. It's easy. It's not so easy. Like, you take people to the water, you can't make them drink, and I find that sometimes in certain communities, counseling isn't really the thing that they see as a life changer. Therapy is not the thing to be. And I've even had people go to a couple of sessions and say, what is this? It's useless. The therapist didn't even advise me or anything. And it's because not everything we think is what it's supposed to be.
No,
It's
I think there's actually a real lack of understanding generally across society of what therapy is. People think the therapist's job is to advise you, but it's not. It's to hold space for you, it's to help you to bring stuff up, to resolve and heal and have safe spaces. One of my placements is at a wonderful college where I'm also working with young people. And they're people from really, really diverse, young people from diverse backgrounds. And 99% of them have families where they have to hide the fact that they're having therapy, or the families are not supportive of it because they're distrustful of therapy. They don't understand the merits of therapy, and they think that there's got to be something wrong with you to go to therapy, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done within lots of different parts of society to really unpick that and bring the real truth around that out. So I think everyone should be in therapy because it's such a transformational process. But unfortunately, there's this stigma that there's something wrong with you if you go to therapy.
Yeah, I think it's the stigma that's always been there with mental health. It's the word mental. I find that the stigma is more attached to, because mental health, like, we all, one way or another, are affected. Our mental health is affected,
Right.
positively or negatively. But I think the moment you mention the word mental, like especially in the Asian community, it's like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me mentally. Why should I go to a therapist? But if you think about it, it's ironic because many of the problems that happen is because you haven't been to a therapist and you're speaking to somebody who you're hoping is listening, but actually they're not, because they're not qualified to listen. And before you know it, it's going through the grapevine and it's spreading, and then it comes back to bite you. So, and I used to work in Camden, where we used to, years ago, this is Henna Women's Group, we used to have a listening service that was trialed, which was fantastic, because what we found is then, having a listening service meant that the taboo associated with counseling and everything else was, taken aside, and people were quite happy to come and speak to someone like, just non-judgmentally, come and have a conversation, just offload everything that was bothering them, and just, that was something they did once a month.
Right.
Really
Yeah.
interesting.
There's something in that, isn't there? Maybe we need to call it something different, right? And there's everything in a name. So we can call it a listening service, we can call it a support service, we can call it just a gathering. There's so many different things, but the thing that happens, the magic in that transaction is priceless, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you're going to come up with some creative ideas. The cogs are probably turning in your head. Yeah, more projects coming our
Yeah,
way. But
yeah.
I was going to ask you as well, like in your experience, do you feel men and women, deal with grief differently?
Interesting, isn't it? I think there's no one way that anyone really grieves, but I think there are some general trends that you tend to see. But it's important to say that not everyone falls into this category. I think there's a pressure on men to be strong,
Mm,
and I think there's a pressure on them to fix. Men feel like they have to fix things, and so and conversely, a lot of women feel like if they're families and they have people that they're supporting. But I think generally it's more accepted that women can cry more openly, share more openly, and say that things are affecting them. But again, not all women. Um,
mm,
so I think there is a difference. I think culturally, in all parts of society, there is a difference, but I'm very careful not to generalize because it depends on your background, your conditioning, and the level of emotional intelligence you have and how developed that is, and whether you understand that mind body connection as well. So, yeah, I'm cautious to overly generalize
mm, mm.
there, but I think there's always going to be a difference in how every individual grieves.
Yeah, yeah. And I had to ask that question because from my own personal experience of how men are in the Bengali community, the
Right.
Bangladeshi community, and how women are, just I noticed that there are differences in, and like you said, it's that thing one society expects them to be men to be more strong.
Mm. I
I
think
I
generationally, I think there's a lot to be said.
Yeah, and it's just interesting because I was just talking to, somebody who's a lot older, family member, and they can't understand somebody who's a lot younger
Right.
because and I was trying to mediate between the two, and I was saying to the younger person, the way they think and the way things are, because culture is just the way you do things, right? Um, is based on what is their norm
Mm.
from day one, their surrounding, their home environment, the only thing they've ever known. For them, this is the norm. But for
Right.
you, it might not be because
Right.
that's not your upbringing. That's not your necessarily your community.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, and I also wonder whether it's different for mothers. Only because it's Mother's Day tomorrow, so I had to.
Yeah. Well,
I wonder.
Mother's Day is so interesting when it comes to grief and loss, right? Because
Mm,
so many people will experience so many different types of grief tomorrow.
mm,
Mothers, people like us who don't have their mothers, and then people who've not been able to be a mother, even if they wanted to, people who are estranged from their mothers, people who don't have the kind of relationships they wanted with their mothers. There's so many different levels of loss there. So,
mm,
and I think for anyone, I'm always really careful around these days because they're so loaded emotionally with so many different connotations. And some people want to celebrate their mothers, so there's no right or wrong in that. But I think it's always helpful to be mindful and sensitive that we give a little nod and acknowledgement to everyone who might be finding those days difficult as well. It's not a
mm.
hallmark moment for everybody.
No, exactly, and it can be quite challenging as well because what do you do if your children want to celebrate you and physically your emotions might be present in your physicality, and it's like what mom doesn't appreciate, but actually mom does appreciate, but mom has her own issues, but
Yeah.
like
But how
it's
beautiful would it be
navigating.
for mum to openly discuss that with her children, right?
Mm,
And
mm,
I do that on Mother's Day and Father's Day with my kids. I'm like, like, I really appreciate this. But we spend time talking about their grandparents. They've lost both sets of grandparents now. And
Mm,
so with every good moment for us,
mm,
there's, an equal amount of grief there that exists.
mm,
And we openly acknowledge that, not everyone's comfortable with it, but I will openly acknowledge it and put it on the table, because then you don't have to hide how you feel.
yeah,
But
no.
then you can lean into the joy at the same time.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think life in general comes with everything, doesn't it? I mean, some
That
of us,
duality.
yes, some of us try to be positive most of the times because, negativity doesn't help anybody. But even amongst that, I think it's understanding that life is a balance of both, and you've got to embrace both, and you have to work with it, and you have to heal from it,
Yeah.
and that.
And sadness is not always a negative thing. It's just another emotion, right? It depends on how we see emotions.
Yeah, I'm the most emotional when I see somebody I care about achieve. When I see somebody I care about being really successful, you will see tears in my eyes.
Mm.
Otherwise, it's like I'm strong.
Mm.
Okay, and sometimes, like I've had those moments, and somebody will say like, "What's wrong? Why?" And for me, it's tears of joy.
Right. Right.
Tears of joy. So I agree with you 100%. I was thinking about like just generally workplaces, and
Mm.
do you feel like, in your opinion, do workplaces support their staff enough around grief? I don't know. What's your like take
I think
from
it's a I
you've
think it's a
worked?
very varied landscape. So I've worked with a lot of companies where we go in and deliver grief training for for line managers, for just educational sessions for employees. I think that some workplaces do it really, really well, where they develop networks for grief, and grief is very much kept alive within the workplace, so it's an open conversation. But then you hear horror stories of people having to justify and produce certificates to go to a funeral, and death certificates, and but I think generally there is oftentimes a real hesitancy of knowing how to speak about grief, and
Mm,
people make a return back to work. They find that people will avoid them because they don't know what to say. So I think more open conversation, more training is really, really important, because people can feel very isolated, and oftentimes people go on long-term sick. But if they knew that work is a grief safety, a safe environment, they're able to come back. They don't have to explain themselves. They don't have to put a mask on and pretend they're okay. There's spaces for them to take a break if they need to. And I think there's so much work that needs to be done, but definitely there are lots of companies that are doing it really well. And, our training has become really popular recently. So, yeah, some good work's being done, but I think breaking down a lot of taboos and education around the different types of losses that we can experience is really still necessary.
mm. What types of losses? Give us some examples.
Yeah, of course. So this is based on a study that was done by two psychiatrists that realized that the physical and emotional symptoms that people were experiencing when a bereavement happened were the same as so many different other life events. So there's a whole piece of research around this. So loss comes in so many different forms: divorce, separation, bereavement is the most obvious one that everyone goes to. Even good things can bring loss. So things like becoming a parent, moving home, health losses can happen. There's loss around careers, and losses that happen when we have redundancy, financial losses, loss of confidence. There's a lot of loss that women experience during the phase of menopause as well. When your children leave home, when your children grow up, there's so many different types of loss that we can experience. And oftentimes when we don't have that knowledge, we can go through a life event and think, well, this should be a really happy time for me. Why am I not feeling happy? What's wrong with me? I'm so ungrateful. But actually, if you understand that while this is a good thing, there's a lot that's going to fall away, and it's a shift in identity for me, and then you can really acknowledge and go through the grieving process while leaning into this new phase of life. It's giving yourself permission. It's just becoming a bit more intelligent emotionally.
No, thank you. And am I allowed to ask what sort of losses women go through during menopause?
Yeah, gosh, of course. So the first thing is you get to a point of life where you're no longer of childbearing age. And for
Mm,
some, even if they have had children, for some they haven't been able to. Just knowing that that's not a possibility anymore can be a huge sense of loss. Your body changes so much during that period. The way you experience the world. A lot of women start to feel invisible in the workplace, at home. You're going through a different period of life. You don't sleep the same anymore. Your brain functions differently. And I think it's a very well-known phenomenon that women will start to see that their usefulness is started to be looked upon with caution. And there's this whole thing around youth. You lose your youth, and you're moving into a whole different phase of life.
mm,
I mean, I'm going through perimenopause at the moment, and it's a huge transition. And letting yourself acknowledge that, and not buying into the pressure that society places on everyone to stay young, look young, don't age, and all the rest of it. But leaning into that with grace is actually a hugely empowering time if we allow it to be, and we don't listen
mm,
to the rhetoric of you've got to stay the same. Just
mm,
just put all the patches on it and stay and hang on to that youth. Like, there's a real wisdom and joy and actual freedom and empowerment
mm,
that comes with perimenopause, but you've got to have the right support, I think.
mm. So with perimenopause comes menopause, and after menopause is the end of one journey, start of another journey.
Right.
It's all very,
Transition.
yeah. Everything is transition, isn't it? And
Mm.
mm, mm, so many losses to think about. I hadn't even thought of, the job losses, I guess. D- when your children go to university, they
Oh,
call it the empty nest syndrome, don't they?
it was terrible. I remember when my eldest boy went off to university for the first time, I couldn't get out of bed for a week. I cried my eyes out, and
Oh
everyone
my
around me
gosh.
was saying, but this is a good thing. Like, you should be really proud. What's wrong with you? And I went, I am so proud of him. But my firstborn has left home. Like, he's there on his own. And it was horrific for me. With the second one, I packed him off very gladly. But it was a period that I had to go through, and no one understood it.
It's really interesting because I was just sitting on the sofa watching rubbish on TV and feeling really low. And I said, "Oh, I've got aches and pains." And again, it was like, okay, that's the body's way of saying there's some emotion that you're not expressing properly.
Right,
And,
right.
and sometimes I'd watch like something that's not supposed to make you emotional. I just sit there
Mm,
crying
mm,
because I missed, having them around. But then you get used to it, and then you think,
you do.
okay, in some ways, I've got more freedom, you know. But I have friends who will still, they will not want to compromise or want to change, leave things as it is. And, I had a conversation the other day with somebody, and I said, why are you cooking? And she said, oh, because I've always done it. And I just find that now they're not interested. They don't appreciate me anymore. And I end up throwing all this food away. And I said, but it's your energy you're wasting. If you know
mm,
they're not going to eat, why are you doing it? Like,
mm,
they're telling you, Mum, don't go to the trouble. You're not listening.
mm.
So there's so much that we need to be aware of when changes are happening, because sometimes, and it's that whole thing that I work with around leadership, the self-awareness piece. when you're not aware, sometimes everything starts with us. Sometimes we are our own,
Everything starts with
yeah, and
awareness.
and and we are our own worst enemy because we're, like self-inflicting some of this stuff. And I'm not, sort of undermining or belittling in any way, shape, or form that, loss is something that we could just take so lightly. But I mean, I was thinking about like the communities that you work with. What kind of communities would you say? Because you said diverse communities, and you said diverse communities, young people. What kind of communities?
No one is
Okay.
precluded. So I think we're very lucky with where we
Mm.
live. We live, in London, and it's a beautiful melting pot of everybody. And I think for me, it's a personal fascination of understanding how people do things really differently, but also the common thread that binds us all together. And I think that both of these things are working at the same time. So, I've worked um, with all communities, and all ages. But for me, it's really important to understand the nuances of all the different communities. Um, so, Black Caribbean communities, Hindu communities, people in the Muslim community. I went and did a piece of work recently with a really wonderful organisation that looks after refugees that have come into the country, and we did a piece of work around the different types of loss that are specific to the refugee communities. And I had the pleasure of listening to the support workers tell me the different losses that the service users had experienced. And I think the refugees get a really difficult rap. People don't understand what it is that they're experiencing, and it's so traumatic. All that displacement, they come from a space where they have a certain social standing, they have their own networks, the way they find themselves in a foreign land, often places where are quite hostile. There was this one woman that told me this man who was completely bereft with grief because he'd just lost 12 members of his family in one go. And and we have amazing people working with communities like this. So yeah, there are different people and places that I work with, but all of them are equally valuable to me because there's so much learning about humanity and how different we can all be, but how at our core we're all really the same.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we were talking earlier, and I think that example of refugees is a really good one. Many of us are affected by what's happening, like on what we see on social media, other parts of the world. Obviously, I mentioned to you earlier, we're going to be celebrating, as a Muslim, I'm celebrating Eid tomorrow. But then you've got places like Palestine where it's just the thought of what people must be going through is really hard. And I'm not going to lie, because sometimes it does make me feel guilty as a Muslim. So I was just wondering, like, you talked about working with refugees and grief being, and so many different types of losses. Like, what do you think, like, in relation to how we get affected and touched by what goes on globally, that might not be personal to us, but it affects us because it's something that we identify with, as a Muslim, or as someone from Palestine, or from, I mean, just even talking to someone who's Jewish, and that individual might not be a victim of what's happening in Palestine. However, it still affects them because it's very, very close to home.
Yeah.
You know what.
Look, it's just heartbreaking, first of all, what's going on for people affected all across the board in that conflict.
Mm,
Okay. And
mm,
I think when we have celebratory days, everything feels more heightened because
mm,
whose is the worst grief? Yours. Okay. The
Mm,
person who's experiencing that grief is the worst, and guilt does come into it. So many different things come into it. And even if someone wasn't caught up in that conflict, when we have days like Christmas, Diwali, Eid, whatever it is, you know, there's always going to be an element of sadness. There may be loved ones that we're missing. We may be looking at conflict around the world. And I think it's understanding that nothing is ever just straight cut, is it? Nothing is ever straight cut. And I think if as human beings we learn to hold the sadness alongside the joy, there's so much freedom in that. There is so
mm,
much freedom in that, in saying it's okay for me to celebrate this, but while I celebrate this, I'm also holding this sadness alongside it. And
mm,
that's going to be the case tomorrow for so many people, for so many different reasons, whether they're missing a loved one this Eid, or they're looking at things going on across the globe, and they feel sadness and heartbreak for the people that are displaced and they've lost their family members, and they're caught up in conflict, they don't feel safe. Whatever it is, like, we can hold both emotions at the same time. And
mm,
I think that just makes us into better human beings.
mm, mm. Yeah, yeah, no, lovely that you pointed to the fact that we can have both emotions at the same time.
Yeah.
And and yeah, I mean, it's just very interesting that whereas sometimes on social media people do want to be positive and there'll be lots of positive news and things, and you know Eid Mubarak everywhere and messages and things, but then you do feel a bit of sadness as well at the same time. And I was just thinking about, like, generally, it's also Mother's Day. So
Mm.
it's like, how many mothers have lost children in conflicts, and like you said, on both, in more than one place in the world. There are mothers that are missing and there are children that are missing. So yeah, we celebrate, but at the same time, it's just acknowledging that where we celebrate, there are others that are grieving.
I've always been conscious of that. I think possibly because I lost mum so young, and
Mm,
it's all. I always find it such a kind thing to do, to give a nod, to say, yeah, today is a day of celebration for many, but it's a day of sadness for many too. And
mm,
there's a great benevolence in doing that, because people feel seen, people feel heard, because that's not everyone's experience. And that's not to
mm.
say we can't celebrate, but it's just sparing a thought for those who may not be having that experience.
I just love that you put joy and sadness side by side. I really, yeah, that really got to me.
Yeah. It's
And
very heart expanding. It expands
yes,
your heart.
yeah, yeah,
It's a fearless
completely
way of doing things, I think.
fearless. Okay, great. You mentioned the word fearless, and I've noticed that we're nearly an hour talking. Just quickly going to wrap up, but wanted to ask, is fearless? You're going on a mountain climb. Have you ever climbed a mountain before?
Well, I don't think as one as big as the one we're about to climb. We've done some hiking in the Lake District, but that's as far as my mountain climbing goes. So I am really looking forward to it. I love the way it came about when you went, "Oh, what are you doing? Have you ever climbed a mountain?" I went, "No, I'm in." So I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. But I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm looking forward to raising a good amount of money towards the project. But yeah, how are you feeling about it?
I'm just as fearless as you are.
I'm not fearless. I'm full of fear right now
Well,
about that.
you had to be fearless to sign up for this. I've climbed one, two, three mountains. I've done a 5K rough runner, just by the teeth, just hanging by the teeth. I don't even know how I managed to get through, but I usually do.
Okay.
I guess my mind is stronger than my body. And even the last mountain climb, it's right behind me. You see that picture? That's
Yeah,
the
it's
mountain
beautiful.
I
Is that where
climbed
we're
last.
climbing?
No, we're climbing a
All
different
right.
one this year,
Okay.
but that was one I climbed last year. I didn't think I'd make it to the top, but I did. We had a fantastic, amazing individual with us, Catherine Reed, who's coming this time as well.
Right.
In fact, she's going to be with us more this time.
Mm,
And Catherine lives in Austria. She knows the mountains like the back of her hand.
brilliant.
I don't even know how she does it, but she does. And Austria has more than 400 mountains. So,
Mm.
and lakes, oh, beautiful lakes. So
I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
me too, me too. And for me, it's the ultimate goal as well. There's a purpose behind what I do. I do a lot of challenge events, and it's always about taking people on a journey, going on the
Mm,
journey together. But also, the journey isn't just climbing the mountain. The journey is part of the legacy, and the legacy is that every single individual gets an opportunity to contribute towards setting up an institution for women that one day hundreds and thousands of women will benefit from. But then
right.
every single person who donates £5, £10, whatever they can towards this becomes a contributor. So it
Yeah.
becomes not a one person thing, but it takes a village. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
it's the village. So fantastic. I'm looking forward to the mountain climb with you, Dipti, and really looking forward to learning so much more. So grateful to you for the 10th of April as well.
Yeah.
The event at the community hub on 10th of April, 2 o'clock, and you're doing a slot in there around trauma informed practice
Yeah.
and
And the
cultural
importance of
competence.
that. Yeah. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. Absolutely. I think there's a lot of learning that we'll do together on that day, but I'm really looking forward to being there.
No, thank you. It'll be really empowering for the groups that will be there. That event has been set up to support and empower Black and Asian led organizations, and I think it's that whole piece around awareness raising. It needs to start with us. Once we are more self aware, we will be better informed and better able to support the communities that we engage at a grassroots level.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, and I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yeah, I hope you have a wonderful Eid and everyone's celebrating tomorrow. And equally, if there's anything you're sad about, I wish you grace with that as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Take
Thank
good
you for
care.
acknowledging, and you take care of yourself too. Have a great evening.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.